Hello.
Hello.
This is a little unusual episode for Grail Country. I have a special guest with me here today. This is my wife, Sergei. And in a little break from the usual esoteric, theological, and philosophical topics we discuss on Grail Country, she's here today to talk to me a little bit about the economic theory of Manfred Max-Neef.
Well, I'm not sure I'm talking about the economic theory as much as his theory of human needs, which is economic, but not necessarily exclusively an economic model.
Gotcha.
So I don't know a whole lot about Manfred Max-Neef. I know he's won an award called the Right Livelihood Award. He's a Chilean, he's deceased, but he was a Chilean professor of economics and economic development. And I came across this because when I was in graduate school and I was looking at that concept of human needs from Maslow's perspective, I was interested in knowing if there were any other kind of models out there, and I ran across Max-Neef's, and it was just like mind-blowing. I really found it very applicable to what I was studying, which is public health, but also just so many other things. And in terms of development specifically, and how to do development in a way that wasn't neoliberal, that was really what attracted me. So go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just pleased that I'm here to let you talk today mostly. I did have a question about why is I know only the barest minimum to be able to even participate in this conversation. I remember the first time we talked about it was when we were both working as volunteers on the Yang campaign. And you were talking to me a little bit about Neef's theories, and I was seeing how they mapped on really well to some of the human-centered capitalism principles of the Yang campaign. And now all of my audience that knows that I'm a Christian anarchist are like, wait a minute, you volunteered for the Yang campaign? And I will just say in my defense that Wendell Berry, also a Christian anarchist, also endorsed Yang.
Well,
so
it was a different time. So long ago. Yes, it was late 2019, early 2020, right? Is that right?
Yeah, late 2019, 2020. It was January 2020 when we were in Iowa knocking doors for Andrew Yang.
Yes, absolutely.
And interacting with all the wonderful people who were a bunch of starry-eyed idealists who were envisioning a better world.
Yes.
And it was a great time.
Yeah, it was. And so what I find, if you, Nathan, could you bring up the
Yeah, absolutely.
I call him Nathan. I'm sure you all know him as Nate, but it's my preferred name for him. This next one again?
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Okay, so this is someone's take on it. This isn't the original, but it's very close. So Max-Neef posited that there were these core concepts of things that humans need, and then there are also ways of achieving those needs. So that the axis that's across the left-hand side here, subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, idleness, creation, identity, and freedom are all those core concepts. And then the how is being, having, doing, and interacting. So I'm just going to give everybody a minute to look at this to see if you haven't seen this before. What I found incredibly useful and freeing about this were things like the idea of idleness as a human need, and creation as a human need, and identity and freedom. And so often we think we don't understand why someone would choose those things over what we see as those core needs, but they can be just as essential and things that people are willing to live or die for. So this really also gave me a chance to understand people who think differently than I do and who have different values than I have. but also see that we're all part of this human matrix, so to speak. So so one concept that Max-Neef talks about, and again, I am not an expert on this, are the idea of satisfiers, like mutualistic satisfiers and pseudo-satisfiers. So in public health, I think, you know, when we're wanting people to focus on or encourage people to think about caring for each other, that's in that being realm. We also might look at what else goes along with that, what else can be aligned with that. So the idea of,
can I just interrupt
Sure.
really quick? The concept of pseudo-satisfiers, I found that like instantly. That seems to me like this concept that has a lot of potential resonances. Like, would that be related to the concept of addiction? Because I can almost see like that kind of relating to John Vervaeke's idea about reciprocal narrowing and reciprocal broadening, where like when you're engaging with these pseudo-satisfiers, it's like that. I don't know if that's a connection or not, but it seems to be a correlation.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, I think for me, I think of things, when I think of pseudo-satisfiers, the first things that come to mind are the kind of materialistic markers of our particular culture in the US and age of the time that we're in, and the idea of, you know, purchasing a particular brand of potato chip or something as identity,
or just like junk
loyalty.
food in general would be
Yes.
a good like example of a pseudo-satisfier, right? Because you have a
Exactly.
legitimate need to eat, and it gives you it satisfies it to a certain degree. It doesn't really satisfy it because you're not getting adequate nutrition for it.
Exactly.
And there's all kinds of like consequences. And then on the more extreme of that, like some of the pseudo-satisfiers can be like, you know, super destructive because they can lead to addictive cycles.
Sure.
So.
I mean, and I think that where those get exploited are things like, so take, for example, vaping, and that kind of playing on that concept of freedom and autonomy and rights and disobedience and all of that.
Is that one of the ways that people get trapped into partaking in pseudo-satisfiers instead of things that are truly satisfying, is because they're led to believe that they're actually getting something that meets one of their other needs?
Yes, and sometimes that can be through marketing, but it can also be through propaganda. It can be through, you know, cultural beliefs or ideas. So I mean, so let's look at this one. The one that really stands out for me when I think of spirituality and religion is that participation one. So the idea of, you know, if what we would like to see is greater participation, what else can we tap into? So to me, it's like, okay, so participation, but also, is there some aspect of creation? I mean, identity gets caught up in there and freedom does, but those can be used in a positive way as well as affection, protection, understanding. So, and then also, you know, that participation when it comes to subsistence, what are we doing to help ourselves and each other? I mean, so this to me, I really find this to be a very useful paradigm for thinking about how do we encourage behaviors we want to see, discourage behaviors we don't want to see. How do we kind of lift the veil on the propaganda or marketing that we're receiving, so that we can see what it is that we truly want versus what we're being sold or what our culture is telling us to want.
Right. It's just like looking at this chart, it just strikes me as like how broad it is. Which is really fascinating for an economic theory, because economic theory is like really like so dominated by like neoliberal theory, which is really just focused exclusively on how to most efficiently grow GDP. This is where I saw it intersecting, because this is something Yang talked about, which is like, you know, that GDP is like an outmoded indicator, and that we have to have this like broader conception of what, you know, people actually need, and that, you know, we can't define these things like simply in terms of like, you know, growing the quantity of an imaginary.
Right. I mean, and people do
Property.
engage in things other than that. But again, you can kind of see how the pseudo-satisfiers. So this helps me to understand, for example, why someone might want to be part of a group that I find abhorrent in that it may tap into their ideas of identity, freedom, understanding, participation, protection. I mean, all of those things.
Right. But I think, but it goes a long way toward like maybe doing a better job of understanding each other and being able to like reach across these divides if we have this understanding that like even people that are like involved in something or doing something that you don't approve of, they're doing it for, there's a real need that they have that is getting satisfied, or they think is getting satisfied.
Right.
And like this is why you really have to get to know people before like you really know what's really driving them, you know.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, and I think that for me, whenever I'm doing any kind of communication, intentional communication, I'm really trying to hit on as many of these as I can, or at least narrow in on the ones for the audience that I'm trying to reach, but
right.
not in an evil, manipulative way, but more in tapping into
Right.
where I think we might have some commonality. So, you know, this is where I think that so much of the messaging, including in public health, goes wrong, is not seeing it this broadly and looking at it far too narrowly and not recognizing.
That's something like because that's your actual work, and your training is in public health. Your master's is a master's in public health, and so public health is your primary work. And I can see kind of like why this would be attractive to you, because that's kind of like it's actually kind of an afterthought in our current system. Like health and well-being is we hope for it as a byproduct of what we're primarily aiming for, but it's not actually an established goal of the system we have. Whereas in Max-Neef's system, it's actually like this is part of the goal set of what we're trying to achieve with our koinonia. So
right. But,
and
I mean, if we were to value, so here on this list, I'm just looking, subsistence work is work is mentioned, you know, a couple of different times, but if you put work on the same level as intimacy, togetherness, home, cultivation, you know, investigation, receptiveness. I mean, like the idea of putting that on an equal playing ground with, you know, family, church, you know, I mean, it's so different than how we usually think of things. So yeah, and I think that
are all of the needs considered equal, or is there a hierarchy?
No, there's no
hierarchy.
I don't think there's really a hierarchy. I think there's a recognition that the kind of subsistence and protection tend to be crucial, but
it seems like if you don't have the subsistence and protection level needs, it seems like those are kind of like those are certainly almost necessary prerequisites for being able to.
You would think, but then for some people, these things that have to do with identity or sense of freedom might come before those needs. I mean, it very much varies based on the individual.
So there's the needs have no hierarchical ordering at all.
Not in this system, not that I'm aware of. And I think that, I mean, we can see that people will take risks to create, to participate, to love, that put their own subsistence and protection at risk.
Right. Oh, yeah, certainly we have lots of examples of people choosing freedom over safety. So you can see how freedom can be something like, even though maybe it's a more basic. Well, I guess the basic where it comes in there, it seems to me that this is an inherently less materialistic way of looking for it. And in the one lecture that I watched with you, I couldn't help but notice that him talking about how neoliberal economic theory comes directly out of trying to model economics after the mechanistic physical sciences of. I mean, the physical sciences are not as mechanistic now. There's been some change there, but certainly the early physical sciences were very, very much looking at a machine model of the universe. That's starting to be less the case. That's kind of breaking apart. And maybe do you think maybe that needed, maybe maybe that powerful mechanistic model of physics starting to break apart for a lot of people across our culture now. Do you think that might help shift economic thinking too? Because it seems like the economic thinking is very much in the grips of this kind of materialist positivist sort of thought still.
Well, so I guess, I mean, I'm going to try to stay away from the political.
Yeah, I'm talking philosophically.
I know, no, but I think politically. So, I mean, to me, I think like, okay, as a economic force that we have here in the United States, if we were to dedicate resources to things that were not just subsistence, but aligned with that, or things that I mean, like and I'm not saying it's necessarily a governmental
right
level,
no, I can see that. Actually, this is one of the things that's interesting to me as like as an anarchist. Like I can see like an anarchist community like trying like using this as a model for like how it wants, because any community is going to have an economy, right? So with anarchist or otherwise. So it would seem to me that to be like one possible model that you might look to have like a way of trying to meet the needs of your community more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that like, I mean, I think about it for teaching too, as a religious school teacher.
Right.
And this has really been helpful to inform where can I tap into different things, for students' interests and learning. But I think that like as teachers, as a teacher, I might recognize that a child will have a difficult time paying attention if they're hungry.
It seems like this is something that you could apply even in your own household, like as a parent
totally.
Too, right?
Yes, 100%.
So it's like, because so this is to me, it's like this to me, there's a lot. I would like to at some point maybe talk to you again about this, because I think that there's some overlap with the economic with the economic thinking of the Russian philosopher and theologian Sergei Bulgakov, who really thinks of economy as a true household, right? Like the etymology of the word would suggest, and also sees economics in much broader terms, much like Neef is doing here. It'd be interesting to have that conversation where we could like compare and contrast and see like where there's some overlap.
Sure. I mean, but what I was going to say about teaching was that, as a teacher, I might recognize that a child might have difficulty concentrating if they're hungry. So they showed up at religious school without having had breakfast and they're hungry and it's difficult for them to concentrate. But it might be just as difficult for them to concentrate if one of these other needs isn't being met. The need for participation, the need for freedom of mind, the need for, the affection, so all of these needs can both enhance and kind of get in the way if they're not met, and it's so variable person to person and in different times and different settings. I think for me as a teacher, when I teach, I'm trying to think about what are those needs that people are having, and not to contradict them. So not to say as a teacher, that say something that takes away someone's freedom, or challenges them, or challenges their sense of identity in a way that they're not interested in being challenged at that moment.
Can we talk a little bit about like so we talked a little bit about like the vertical part of this little chart. Can we talk a little bit about the horizontal part, the being, having, doing, and interacting?
Yes.
What's going on with that?
I find this really interesting in the sense of, so having, I think, is the one that's kind of easiest to conceive of, things that we have, right. More tangible things, but the doing is that I think is the praxis piece of it. It's our values applied in some ways, and then the interacting is like when we're doing these things with other people or in the absence of other people intentionally. And then the same thing with being. I mean, it's just it's about an orientation more than an action or a tangible thing that we have. So, I mean, sorry, my nose is so itchy, but I think that
it's almost like a state. I think with the being category things, to me, things that could be described as being a state, right? So that to me, I can see why that would be related to being, because it's like it's not anything that it's not anything you have, it's not anything you do. It's not necessarily anything that exists within your actions interaction with other people in the world. It's like an internalized state.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, one thing here that I find super interesting, like I just today I'm gravitating towards, is the idea that we're interacting, its identity and social rhythms, maturation stages. But to me, holidays are absolutely that critical intersection in some ways of identity and
I think
interacting
holidays actually intersect with participation
as well.
too, because
Yes.
a lot of that is like ritualized.
Right, but to me, I mean, when I talked about how my own relationship,
The last
with
time we
interacting
talked
with-
together was Hanukkah too.
right, my own interaction relationship with the holiday of Christmas is, I mean, it touches on that idea of like, holidays are important to me. I love traditions, but it's not mine it doesn't feel like it's mine in some
Right.
fundamental way, but I don't want to miss out on the participation. So it just is it's an interesting thing. But I think, so, I mean, I know that Max-Neef on a more macro level talks about things like, military spending as being a pseudo-satisfier for protection rather than what's actually the protection that we need in our day-to-day lives. Or, I mean, yeah, so there's a whole lot there.
But I almost think, to me, I gotta say that here's where I'm gonna enter. Here's where my anarchism is gonna come in. I almost see it being almost impossible to implement a system like this within the current nation state system. And partly that protection piece is a big deal because the state's monopoly on violence is kind of its raison d'etre. So it's forced to perpetuate that in order to continue to make people think that it needs to exist. So but ironically, if there were actual peace, then it would actually negate the reason for its existence. So it has a motivation to keep us in perpetual warfare. And that's not only, I don't mean only foreign wars, but there's also like domestic conflict also is like, there's every reason for the system to drive levels of domestic conflict because it creates problems for them to solve and justifies their existence.
Right. I mean, and this to me is also just a really interesting exercise for groups or for families, is to just look at this and say, well, what resonates with you? What jumps out of you? Where are your values the most? So I was thinking, a friend of mine was telling me that, I mean, I've known her for probably 10 years and have known her to be vegetarian, have been vegetarian since a very young age, but she says she's the only vegetarian in her household now.
Right.
And I just think like that is an interesting thing because it's so core to who she is, both identity and in the being, having, doing, interacting, all of that. But she understands her family has other priorities or values or things, and they don't force her obviously to eat meat.
Right.
But it's a way of, so I just feel like that it is very interesting.
Well, there's something about our system that puts that it encourages people to kind of be in an isolated state where it's kind of you're kind of on your own, right? So we're not actually so much focused on getting these things through community so much as is you're kind of on your own to get them.
Right.
And part of that is because our system is set up to not care about except for this is very tiny narrow focus.
Right. So I'll give you an example of a time where I used this in a practical way. Was I worked for our state's healthcare purchasing entity, and in the wellness realm, which wellness stuff can be problematic and very materialistic, or just
right, because
commercial.
It's an industry.
Sure, but
so yeah.
But what I was doing was I thought, okay, what if we created something that was like a tiered system for people who wanted to start, getting some physical activity and wanted some, kind of a positive feedback or reinforcement loop for that. So people would sign up and they would say, either their goal was to get started, their goal was to maintain what they're doing, their goal was to really increase what they were doing. So they could choose those tiers, and then within that, they would get weekly messages that were, encouraging them on that particular path, and recognizing. So then some of the messages might have to do with engaging with family around physical activity, or they may have to do with identity. It's like, do you see yourself as an athlete?
Right.
So there's all kinds of ways there.
And while I'm calling out the state for like being narrowly focused here too, I would say that like honestly, like my conception of what the church ought to be is like a community that's actually fulfilling like all of these needs for people in as much as it possibly can, rather than simply being happy with being a niche. And the reason I say that is because I really think that the churches can be a very powerful potential alternate source of community that doesn't rest in dependency on what the direction of the state is. Like particularly like large churches, right? They have enough resources to actually like create meaningful change and communities for their congregations without being reliant on anything changing in the larger system. But they've kind of just accepted this smaller role that the larger system has put upon them.
Yes, I think that's, looking at those pseudo-satisfiers are really important, because then you can say, well, what is it that's satisfying someone's sense of need for association or community, or or prayer, or all kinds of different things that you see on here.
And to be fair, I want to be fair. There are churches. I can think of churches that I know that are actually doing this.
Right.
Like I just had my friend Julian, who's a Hutterite, who was in the conversation that I had most recently. Julian is living in a community that is absolutely doing this.
Right.
Like 100%. Like they don't know anything about
right.
Manfred Max-Neef.
Right.
But
I think that's
they've built a community. And you don't need to either. This is like the kind of things that healthy communities kind of just do, right?
Right. And I think that's, to me, it was like, this isn't something that he discovered. Invented. It was more like a lifting of a veil of a way of
I think he was just mainly trying to interject this stuff into the conversation within the field of economics, because like it pretends that it's not important, as if human being. Like in the lecture that we watched together, he was talking about how like basically within the current system, like human beings are reduced to their utility.
Right.
So
and I feel like
their labor.
Right.
That's it.
As a parent, it's so damaging to see what that does to our kids, and to have them be so concerned about their utility versus just their inherent value of being,
And this is another overlap with the Yang campaign, because like that was one of the things about the idea of universal basic income. It's like, hey, you're a human being, you matter. Your basic needs should be taken care of simply because you're a human being and you matter. Like you don't have to prove your utility in order to be someone who matters and is worth taking care of.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say something that is a little embarrassing, but lately I've been going to McDonald's mostly to get drinks, but some also for my daughter. She likes them, and she hadn't had that growing up. That was not a typical thing for us. But I have this, it's like they're very short staffed and the lines are sometimes long. And I think, okay, I'm gonna be as kind as I possibly can. These are people in a stressful situation. They're understaffed, they're overworked. And I think, if I want to eat at McDonald's, maybe I should have a shift at McDonald's. Like, it's not like I think that it's somebody else's responsibility. It's like, well, if this is what I want, maybe I should, participate in it. And not that I think it's good, and not that that's really what I would want to do, but I feel like none of us should think.
Yeah, I don't need you think you need to participate in the principality of McDonald's.
No, but whether it's that or picking up the garbage on our street, or there's like whatever I think of something that I think is somebody else's job, I force myself to think, no, this could be anyone's job. This all could be,
Right.
this is our job.
Right.
You know, if there are things that need to be done. And so it's not that,
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too, is like, right, so part of the system that we have is that because we've set this goal to be this very narrow goal, the roles that are the most rewarded are the roles that most contribute to this very narrow goal that we've set.
Mhm.
Like, even though human beings need a lot more things, right?
Right.
So people who, like, one of the things that on this chart is affection, right? So I hope all of you have good mothers. I know I do, right? But but every mother, who's at home with their young children is providing an important role in meeting that need for their growing children. And we place no value on that within our current system at all. It has an economic value of 0, even
Right.
though its actual human value is
Right. And I think
almost incalculably
Right.
more
And
important than
And
the people
other-
helping grow the GDP.
Sure, and other countries do recognize this by having, longer maternal, paternal leave and, boxes that arrive for every, family as they're expecting a newborn and all kinds of things. And so, I mean, I think that we try to fill in some of these gaps, but it is just really hard. I mean, I think about, sometimes there'll be a call for, meals for someone, and sometimes I can do it and sometimes I can't. I know that one time when I did that, it was so rewarding. It was a colleague of mine whose husband had surgery, and I made like just a really delicious, healthy meal, and they were so appreciative, and it felt so. And I mean, it's standing out to me, even though that was again.
I know you're always
15 years
volunteering.
ago.
I know when there's people sick in our church, you're always immediately wanting to see if you can bring them some Jewish penicillin.
Well, not always, but
Often,
sometimes.
I mentioned it. You're at least like, oh, do they need some?
Yeah.
Can I bring them some chicken soup?
Well, and to me, that's, I mean, yes. I mean, I really do enjoy my work, and I feel like it has value. It's not like about building the GDP. That's not what my work is about. But at the same time, I mean, I feel like if a larger share of my time needed to be taken up in community pursuits, I would be totally okay with that.
Mm.
I just wouldn't want it to cut into my idleness or creation or my own participation in things that matter to me. So yeah. Well,
I think this has been, I would like to talk to you about this again. And I think really like talking about Max-Neef's system alongside Bulgakov's. I think that might be a productive area of conversation. Like one last quick thing, like I know that his system is often called Barefoot economics. Can you just quickly explain the reason for that? And then I believe your daughter needs something.
I think she does, and I don't want to keep ignoring her. So actually, I can't answer that question. I have some thoughts, but let's save that for next time. And I'm super interested in what other people think, if they've seen this before, if it's an interesting model for them, if they have any critiques or criticisms. And I know Max-Neef is known as a Marxist economist, so I know that might be a challenge for some people, but yeah,
I think it's actually system neutral concept.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm neither a Marxist nor a capitalist, so.
Okay, and speaking of which, I'm gonna say hi to my daughter.
Yes, someday I'll explain to you why there are systems other than Marxism and capitalism, but not enough time for that today.
I know there are. Okay. Okay. Bye.
Yep. Thank you for joining us.
What do you take?